All right, let's woo, loud. Okay, let's get going here. Oh, so many things to talk about. Okay. Is it reading week yet? Oh my goodness. I can't believe it. MacEwan University was actually having like a debate on canceling their fall break so that they wouldn't have to book exams on Sundays. Like, man, I would take an exam on Sunday any day over canceling fall break. I work I never take time off. I just like mark, but I don't have to like put on real pants. I can wear like sweatpants and stay in my house. And I'm like, I would not give that up for no Sundays. I would rather come and give you an exam on Sunday. Okay. I'm gonna draw little lines to make this a sun. All right, so we're gonna keep talking about qualitative interviewing today. As far as your major labs go, I have not even looked at them. I'm sorry, it's been a week so far, and I'm hoping to have some time eventually. Someday, I was going to say tomorrow, but then I'm like, wait, no, I have 3 letters of recommendation I need to write. I have this other assignment or test that I've been putting off in another class for 2 weeks. Yeah, so you'll get it back before the end of the term, probably. No, I'm kidding. I'll get L'Oreal working on it too. I believe there is a lab tomorrow. Yes. So don't forget to go, and I will send my dutiful reminder to L'Oreal. I'm sure she will never forget again, but 100% I'm never ever going to take that for granted. And I have her again for this same class next semester. So by the way, if you think the one time you have to take Intro to Methods is bad, imagine teaching it 2 semesters back to back and trying to come up with like fresh takes and humor on this course. It's not that this isn't interesting material. It's just that, you know, it roughly rivals watching Linoleum Curl at times. I do love methods, but at the same time, it's one of those things that I'm like, man, sometimes it's hard to get people really excited about methods. It's like sociology of youth, no problem. Religion, piece of cake. Critical media theory, easy. Methods, less so. All right, well, let's talk methods. I'll see if I can make interviewing interesting. I have fun stories. Okay, so where did we leave off? Indirect questions. I said way too much about that. I'm not going to recapitulate it. All right, so other kinds of questions. Actually, do you have any questions? As always, no, never. Are you wearing a U2 shirt, Marina?
It's not like actually U2.
Okay, because Joshua Tree, I wasn't sure if it was the Joshua Tree album. So I'm like, oh, cool, U2, I hate them. They did that to me on my iPhone 4, and I've never forgiven Apple or U2. So I have no Apple products other than the iPad my work forced me to get. I mean, they did pay like $1,500 for it, so what a terrible thing they've done to me. And yeah, like an old iPhone that my son uses, that I think was my wife's. Those are the Apple devices I own, and I hate them so much. So, U2's great. I can't even, I used to like them, and then they forced that album on my phone, and now I can't even like stand even their old stuff that I used to like. I don't know what it is. Okay, enough about my problems. All right, so other kind of questions. Structuring questions. Structuring questions are usually a way of like, you've run out of runway on a particular line of questioning, or someone is off on a tangent and you need to kind of bring things back. So it would look like something like, okay, now I want to move on to a different topic, or I have questions on some other topics I'd like to ask. Could you tell, and then you kind of link in like a direct question or an introducing question into that, like, could you tell me about X? Could you tell me, about Y? Could you tell me about how you feel about Apple putting a U2 album on your phone? Are you still bitter about that all of these years later? It's weird that giving away something for free would have caused such visceral hatred in people. It's like, here's a free thing. It's like, I don't like your free thing. I think what the problem, if I remember, this was a really long time ago, you couldn't get rid of it, right? It was like in your list of albums on iTunes forever. Yeah, and it's like, hey, we have a promotion with U2. Do you remember? Clearly. Your Gen X parents love U2. Don't you love U2? No. Okay. Oh, all right. Okay. Structuring question is pretty simple. Silence, not technically a kind of question. If you can imagine, I struggle with the silence part of interviews, right? This is true of me as a professor too. It's like I will ask a question and then I'll keep talking and talking, hoping someone will raise their hand, and I'll just keep talking and then usually be like, wait, I need to stop talking in order to give you a chance to talk. The idea behind sometimes a pause gives people opportunity to reflect, amplify their answer. The idea is don't jump in too quickly all the time. Don't over-explain questions. If people look like they're not, they don't know. Sorry, if people, I'm making myself laugh at the examples that are in my head. Give people a moment to think, right? Don't over-explain. Don't keep rambling on so they don't know when they can jump in. And sometimes, a little bit of uncomfortable silence will cause people, this is true in focus groups as well, will cause someone to want to break that silence. However, and here's the trick, and this is what I'm probably not good at, don't pause for so long that the interviewee feels embarrassed, right? If you're just like, you kind of have to judge things, which is where being a people person and understanding people can be good. And again, I'm super bad at this. Like, I'm the worst at silence. I'll just keep talking. If no one says anything, I'll like elaborate the question. When no one says anything still, I'll tell a little story. I'll tell a couple of jokes, and then be like, well, I guess no one wants to answer this question, so let's move on. Okay, this is the story of Catholicism and pop culture half the time. I answer my own questions. Perhaps I find myself too fascinating. I don't know. Okay, and then interpreting questions, our last one. Do you mean your leadership role had to change from one of encouraging others to a more direct one, right? You're trying to clarify something. So again, you sort of restate what you think the person told you. You can also sometimes call this paraphrase. All right, so you paraphrase what they said, checking for whether you've interpreted what they said correctly, right? So this is usually you checking your understanding of what they said. And again, you're often paraphrasing in order to try and figure out, when you said, weasels are cool, did you mean that they are slinky and can go through many tubes? I don't know. Why are weasels cool? They just are. We don't need reasons. Vicious, apparently, though. Everything in the weasel family apparently just wants to kill you. I think it was a story out of the west coast of the US where a band of roving sea otters just attacked someone on the street. And I'm like, damn, the weasel family is hardcore. Okay. Oh. My mood gets sillier as this course goes on. I'm sorry. I try to bring the levity. So listen, don't talk too much, right? The point of doing an interview, it's not so much for you to have a conversation with the person as to, ask them questions and listen to what they're saying. Now, I do say this, sometimes you do have to, I say, like, you're not there to have a conversation with the person. Sometimes those conversational elements, though, are actually what is going to make your interview work, right? They want to know that they're talking to a human being and not a chat GPT robot that just keeps asking them questions. So you're primarily there to listen to their, so you don't want to be jumping in all the time, and you don't want to take over your own interview. At the same time, you do have to be a human being, and some rapport with your interviewee is going to help. Yeah, don't avoid, listen, avoid, avoid. Don't make your interviewee anxious or uncomfortable. Don't harm them, right? The idea, you're there to learn about their life, not to induce a panic attack or make them relive traumatic moments, unless that's part of what you've set out in advance. Though I'm not sure the research ethics board would be like, I'm going to make people relive all of their worst traumas in interview form. That might not pass. But right, you're not there to harm people, and you're not there to pepper them with questions, make them feel anxious. You're there to interview them. And yeah, we talked about vignette questions when we talked about surveys. You can use vignette questions too, right? Vignette questions you can use to ground interviewees' ideas and accounts of behavior in similar circumstances. So present a scenario and ask what people think and would do, right? So what would you do if you were faced with this, right? You can use that as a kind of question. So you can add vignette questions to your list. Okay. Okay. When you're doing, just like ethnography, when you're doing interviews, and it doesn't matter if you are doing interviews in person, if you are doing interviews on Zoom, you still want to write down field notes at the end. And here, in your field notes, you want to put anything that would help you contextualize, the interview in some way. So if there are, you're going to note things like how it went, like how you feel the interview went. Was the person open? Were they kind of hostile? Right? Did it flow smoothly? How were your questions? Did you feel like there were any questions that were too hard for people to answer? The wording wasn't quite right. Any of those kinds of things. Where the interview was conducted, that can be pretty basic, but any kind of contextual things that might have been happening in the environment that might have affected the interview. So I don't know, if you're in the library and all of a sudden some kid comes and taps on the wall of the classroom and it really interrupts your interview and maybe made your participant nervous or upset or angry, right? You want to note any of those things down. If you did it online, you can note that. If the person seemed distracted at times, like they weren't listening, note all of those things. Any other feelings or issues that were raised during the interview, what was going on around the interview. So like if there's important like historical events that happened, you can note that, right? So I don't know, if you interviewed someone and the day before, I don't know, Russia invaded Ukraine, right? That might be relevant in terms of what happened. And this is, again, all with field notes. It's always trying to explain to yourself as many of the things that you observed as, so basically, given that you're probably going to forget when you are going back and working with the data, what was going on, you create the field notes so that it can remind you of what the context was, right? In terms of the interview, in terms of what was happening, in terms of any important information, so that when you go to actually work with, you're talking to John, you're going to remember all of these little things that you might later forget, because we forget things that are going to help you better understand that interview. So field notes, just as important as in ethnography. You want to know what was going on, where it was, historical context, social context, anything that you think is relevant. Write as much of it down, and then connect it to your transcript so you can review it later. Okay. Interview topics, pretty much anything. Values, beliefs, behavior, their formal and informal role, relationships, places, emotions, encounters, stories, events, anything you can think of, right? Pretty much nothing is off. Of course, dependent on your research question and your ethics, nothing necessarily is outside of the scope of an interview. You can ask people about just about anything that you're all comfortable talking about, right? So anything you want. Oh, okay. Recording and transcribing. Definitely record your interviews. And that always, that should be on your consent letter, right? That you're going to record the interviews. And you should let people know well in advance, right? Especially if you're doing some pre-screening. You should let them know, hey, I'm planning to record our interview. Is that okay? And most of the time, people are fine with it. You might get the occasional time that people might say no. That creates a whole set of problems where you then have to try and take live notes during the interview, and then rebuild the interview from your memory directly after. It's a long one. Drill, baby, drill. Okay, I don't know. This screen now doesn't work, apparently, so the failing technology museum that is this room and this building is continuing on. I hope you all graduate before it eventually falls in upon us. I will be here forever, so one day you'll read about my grisly death in the collapse of the Tory building. Oh, cheery thoughts for a Wednesday. Okay. Yeah, the interviewee should have consent to record. And again, even if they sign the consent letter, do remind them at the beginning and tell them when you're going to start recording. Basically you want to make sure that they know what's on the record. And off the record. I know this isn't feasible, but I've always wondered, couldn't they have the construction people just do the construction at night? Be we're teaching classes. Can we find just a crew of people that don't care about never seeing their friends or relatives and just work at night? I'm sure these people exist. Although the university is probably way too cheap for that. It's no, we want the cheap construction workers that work during the day. Okay. Yeah, so you need to have consent to record. You should let people know when you're going to start recording, right? Usually you do a little pre-chatter with the person, and then you're okay, I'm going to turn the recording on now. So anything you say after this is on the record. So I will say it's not as bad as when I used to have classes in cab, and during the fall they would have, I think it's bar none or whatever, the ag people, and they would have fire trucks and horses and cowboys out on the quad, and they'd be honking the horns in the middle of class, and I would just lose it. I would just start laughing so hard. I'm I'm competing with a rodeo. I don't know what to do. I can deal with whatever that is. Yeah, so you tell them, okay, I'm turning off the recorder, so anything you say after this point is considered off the record, right? So I won't use any of it in my research. Just being really transparent with people is good. Transcription sucks. It sucks. I hate it. I'm also bad at it, so this is one of the problems. My honest to God advice is to use a transcription service, and there are lots of them online. You know, I think rev.com is like $1 per minute, so it's incredibly cheap, which I will never say that I used it because it was not included in any of my consent letters, but so transcription, right, basically is you listen back to the interview and you type it all out. It is expensive if you get other people to do it sometimes, and it is incredibly slow. You know, usually, 5 to 6 hours to do 1 hour of transcription if you're an amateur, right? People who get really good at it will do this much quicker. And I didn't know this when I was doing transcription because no one thought to told me, thank you, supervisor who is worthless, that there are these transcription pedals that you can buy on Amazon where you can use your foot to go back and forth and pause. It's like 3 buttons, which would have made my life considerably easier. But as it goes, I did one interview, tried to transcribe it. It took me about 8 hours to transcribe a 2-hour interview. I said, I don't like this. So I went to rev.com and signed up for $1 a minute and paid with my credit card. It cost, I think for the whole project, it cost me like $800, and it was the best money I ever spent. I did, however, grossly violate my ethics because I had not said that this company was going to have access to the data, and I was just like, well, who's gonna know? And so sometimes research is, who's gonna know? This is why I get in trouble sometimes. And yeah, I would 100%, training is required. You get a lot faster. Be careful. Possible errors, mishearing, fatigue, carelessness can screw things up. And then it takes a lot longer. And you have to go back and re-listen to things. Obviously, the better your equipment is, the less of, sometimes transcribers will put, inaudible in brackets because it's like, I can't hear what's going on. So try to avoid that. I've also learned that foreign words do not work well in transcription because there's no guarantee the person will know the foreign word. I was doing Russian TV, right? And so we would talk and we would use specific like Russian words, names, or TV shows with the original titles, and people would be like, foreign word. I'm like, okay, I can go back and figure out which one we were talking about. So transcription, it sucks, it's hard. I suggest paying for someone else to do it, and that means writing it in your consent and in your ethics. And you can make the case that even like, it's encrypted, the company keeps everything confidential, blah, 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 in your ethics application. But I would seriously, some people love transcription, and those people are evil sociopaths. I hate it, so I would suggest getting someone else to do it. But it's important because either you have a transcript that you can refer to, or you have to keep going back and listening to the interviews again and again to get the quotes that you want, which is going to be more time consuming in the end. Okay. Yeah, flexibility in interviewing, right? I said it's not a conversation. Also, it is a conversation. So, you have to kind of go with the flow, right? Go with it. Don't be too wedded to your question order. And if if people answer things out of order, you don't want to be too rigid. You kind of just have to go with your interviewee. And every interviewee is different. And sometimes, being personable and knowing how to talk to people will just get you far along the way. Flexibility is also important when audio recording equipment breaks down or the interviewee refuses permission for recording to take place. Now, I have never been in this situation, and frankly, I would always pre-screen people and tell them what I was doing, which takes care of this. If someone does say, that you can't record it, you get out your pen and paper or your laptop and you start making notes about the interview and try to write down quotes verbatim as best as you can. And you do your work of kind of reconstructing it afterwards. You kind of have to go with the flow. Yeah, knowing when to switch, I would say, on and off your recording equipment. Sometimes people speak more freely after the recording's turned off, but you have to be clear with them, like if the recorder's turned off, is it still on the record? Because if it's not, you can't use it. If someone thought they were done with the on the record part of your conversation, you can't. I don't think ethically use it. I've seen people do it, but I wouldn't. Okay. So when you're transcribing and analyzing, technically what we would call an interview in a sense is co-constructed data, right? Because you were there in the, part of the process of constructing the information. So you were co-constructing it. So reflect on your own interactions with the participant and how it might have affected, what was said, how it was said, what was left unsaid, right? And again, you're looking for, is there any sense of reactivity? That you, being the questioner or the way you ask questions, maybe shaped the discussion in one way or another. Okay, hang on. I'm going to check something. For some reason, on the recordings, and I'm somewhat open to the idea that if you want a perfect recording, come to class, but for some reason, this laptop, as opposed to my other one, always wants to reformat the screen size for some reason I can't explain. So people lose, all they got was a white corner for like half of this. Oopsie. I can't keep an eye on too many things at once. All right. I tried locking it. I don't know what happened. Project scaling, scale to window. All right. I don't know. Can't make everything work. Oh, I thought I erased all of this. Sadness. Okay, sorry, this was last year's. I don't even think I can erase it with my fancy eraser. Erase, no, it's not there according to the computer. Whatever, we're gonna work with it. Focus groups. Interviewing's sad, desperate cousin. No, I'm kidding. I love focus groups. There does tend to be a little bit of snobbery in academic circles when it comes to focus groups. Often they're seen as less in-depth. And that makes sense, right? Because like your average focus group is going to be between 1 and 3 hours. And between like hopefully 6 to, at the outside, maybe 12 people. Which means each person is going to have a lot less time to speak than if you were doing a 1 or 2 hour interview with a single person, right? So focus groups definitely less depth in some ways than an interview. Yeah, a focus group is basically just an interview with a group of people, right? Groups of 4 or more people, often with the idea that people can interact with each other, can listen to each other's answers and kind of, build on each other in terms of the content that they're talking about. So, the value of focus groups is gaining access to meanings that develop during interactions with others rather than in isolation. Also, I wrote this last year, but it's still true. Part of the value of focus groups is also time and money. I don't want to discourage you from eventually becoming researchers, but don't do it. No, I'm kidding. One of the things that you're always going to face is 2 constraints. It's time and money. Time, you have limited time. People have limited time. If you want to get a research project done and let's say you're working towards your tenure, you have 5 years from the time you start, you land on the ground and start your job at a university. So you got to get the research done in a timely fashion so that you can publish, so that you can get your tenure, right? So time is limited, and going off and doing 25, 30 interviews, is really time consuming. And money. Well, sometimes people get massive research grants. A lot of time, you're doing research, how to put it kindly, on a shoestring budget, if that. Also, you get very popular if people know that you're a researcher that can do research on a shoestring budget, because organizations and companies love shoestring budgets, right? They love it if you can be the researcher that knows how to do things cheap. And if you tell them, maybe because you're stupid and you don't actually know how much a research project is going to cost, that you can do this massive research project for like 10 grand, they're going to be like, because they know, a lot of companies and organizations are like, you think you can do it for 10 grand? Great, we'll pay you 10 grand, here it is. This was me, I did a research project for basically 10 grand. It probably should have cost 6 times that much, but I compensated by almost killing myself. Like literally with the effort of doing the work of an entire team, essentially by myself, which was super duper fun, by the way. This was my work for Covenant Health, which I did enjoy, but I also massively underappreciated how much things were going to cost. Actually, I think it was 25 or 20,000, which was still probably 3 times less than they would have gotten from like a professional researcher, but whatever. All good, kept me employed and allowed me to buy cheese. So all good. But yeah, money is always tight. While you might think your research project and your research interests are super duper interesting, I almost guarantee the universe feels differently. And finding someone to give you money and as much money as you think things are going to cost is going to be difficult. So focus groups can be a very, very efficient use of both time and money because, so I did 6 focus groups for the project I'm talking about for Covenant Health. And I basically did this on like 3 Saturdays, right? So I did morning and afternoon sessions 3 weeks in a row on Saturdays. And just got everything and a pretty decent amount of focus group data out of the way, in 3 weeks. So that, 3 weeks or three days. And I think I'm trying to remember how many people we talked to. It was supposed to be 10 people per session, but not everybody showed up. So I think we had at the end about 50 people. So the data from 50 people in 3 days, I don't know, that looks like Apple people. 50 people in 3 days, right? Which is not half bad. And I mean, it cost me almost nothing because I was, working at the university. I managed to get the space we were focus grouping in for free. So I bought food and I paid people $25 gift cards and off we went to the races. It was relatively cheap. So focus groups do tend to be pretty time effective and cheap. And yeah, you do get to see, people co-constructing meaning with each other and all of that jazz. It might bring, a wide variety of perspective on the issue in a very timely and effective fashion, right? And then people will agree with each other. So you can see where a lot of people of your population agree or disagree with each other. You can see where some of the ruptures are. People will talk about, why they feel the way they do. But overall, right, I think it's the top 2 things, why you would use a focus group instead of interviews, mostly time and money. So I did another one. When I was still in my master's in Calgary, they were doing this big event at U of C. I can't remember what it was called now, but it was all about climate change, and they brought people in from all over Canada. And because it was U of C, they found me because they had no grad students who spoke French. It's Calgary. So I got to be at the French table, which was super fun. But we brought in, I think it was 200 people from all over Canada to talk about, perceptions of climate change, and people were grouped in regional groupings, right? So I had Quebec, if you can imagine. And so it was very in terms of getting lots of people from across Canada without having to fly your researchers all over the place. It was very quick. It was a weekend, 2 days. We flew people in on the Friday, rented out basically a whole hotel, did focus groups for 2 days, and then flew them back. And it was great. Okay, so how am I doing for time? Oh, I was hoping that was way less time left than this. No, I'm kidding. No, I like focus groups. I like talking about this. I'm just joking. So, focus groups, right? Generally speaking, every kind of group that you have is going to have, 2 people. The most important one is the moderator or the facilitator of the focus group, and the one that's not mentioned here is someone who is recording. And this would be almost like live field notes. I've seen some focus groups where people basically try to take these two roles and merge them together. And I have found generally that that doesn't work as well, because if you're trying to kind of control the flow of a conversation, stopping to make detailed notes about what's going on, and Betty just shot John a nasty look, and then you have to describe that nasty look and the expression on Betty's face. It's better if there's like two people kind of doing these as separate jobs. But again, the almighty dollar sometimes says, I'm going to do both of these things, which on the project I was doing, I did not do both of those things. I hired a student to do it. So, yeah, the facilitator, moderator, right? Basically, again, you're probably going to have a kind of focus group guide, right? You're going to have some questions that you want to ask people, but your goal really is to make sure that the discussion stays on topic, and focus groups are notorious for getting off topic. And it's a weird one because I would say in a focus group, you need at least two people with big personalities. You never know, right? I've sat in focus groups where there were no big personalities, and boy, are they ever a slog. If you have one or two big personalities, like that person who is just going to offer their opinion, like before you're even done with the question, like they're like, oh, I have things to say, right? That is your favorite people in focus groups. I remember one, her name was Brandy. She was a public school teacher. She was amazing. I loved her. Because even though like half my focus group didn't show up, she entirely made up for it just with the size of her personality. It was awesome. Yeah, you usually want like two big personalities, but the big personalities also will tend to drive your focus group discussion in weird directions, right? Because they have their own thoughts and they are going to tell you whether you want to hear it or not. Kind of like your uncle at Thanksgiving, right? They're going to tell you about this documentary they saw on YouTube, whether you want to hear about it or not. Focus groups are a little bit like Thanksgiving dinner. Someone's going to try to take it off in a weird direction. And your job is two things. A, to make sure you do not let people hijack your whole focus group and make it about whatever they want to talk about, because you're actually trying to accomplish something. And the other one is to make sure that everybody who wants to talk is able to participate without coercing people. And I mean, the way practical tips, the way I've often done this is you're kind of, as the moderator, you're watching the table, right? You know who's spoken. And if you always have like a wallflower that hasn't said anything in like an hour, and you're always questioning like, why did this person, since they're so shy, want to participate in a focus group? It seems odd, but it's to be like, hey, John, we haven't heard from you in a while. Is there anything you wanted to add to this, right? And just give them a chance. And if they're like, you're like, okay, great. What about you, Sandra? And kind of move on. So no coercion, but giving people a chance and just like redirecting. Being like, hey, we haven't heard from that side of the table because Brandy's sitting on that side of the table. And always kind of trying to balance out your participants in some way. Naturalistic, right? You're trying to have as natural a conversation as possible. Brings out how individuals collectively make decisions, interpretations, how they talk to each other, how they co-construct meaning, and how they reflect off of each other. And you want the conversation to be as naturalistic as possible in your artificial environment. So, still good. Okay, happy days. Okay, so this is, I will say, this is the recommendation that's in the textbook. Researchers, and they say researchers should conduct 10 to 15 groups. Great, that's a great idea. In a magical world where you have infinite time and money, 10 to, so I would say that's like a weird, it's kind of a weird recommendation. It depends on the scope of the project, right? What's the scope of your project? You can kind of decide how many groups. how many people can you actually recruit? That's another big question. Recruiting is not easy. And it's probably one of the harder aspects of focus groups. And sometimes you're going to be like, I want to do 22 focus groups, and you got enough people for 4. And then you just got to live with 4 focus groups. So maybe you should conduct 10 to 15. I don't know if that's true. That's what the textbook says. Sometimes it's just conduct as many as you can. Do the most you can. When you run out of people, well, you're done. More or less if demographics are diverse. Less if you just cannot find people to participate. Okay, and we'll talk about this when we talk about, analyzing data. Generally speaking, like the ideal is to, complete focus groups until you hit theoretical saturation, which is where you're not learning anything new, right? So you've done a whole bunch of focus groups, and you feel like you're rehearing the same things over and over again. You're not learning anything new. You can predict what's going to be said. No new information is coming out, or you hit your deadline. The report is due, or you run out of money. Right? You're out of money, and so you stop. And sometimes, the practicalities of it. In a perfect world, you would keep going and doing more focus groups until you hit theoretical saturation. But in the real world, your supervisor's telling you, you need to finish your PhD because I'm retiring. So you need to move on, and I need to move on. And I've already bought the condo in Boca Raton, so let's get this done. And you're like, I am done with my focus groups. I just finished. As a coincidence, I just completed my last one. And then you start writing your dissertation, right? So this is like, in the best of all possible worlds, you would do all of these things. In reality, people often stop before they hit theoretical saturation. And sometimes looking for theoretical saturation can be the thing that keeps you in the perpetual research project that you don't want to be in. I'm probably being too honest about academic research, and I'm really sorry. I would love it to be this like platonic ideal of, the intellectual doing research with no constraints, and people just give you sacks of money because you're so interesting, or your research is so interesting, but that's not how it works. So, or maybe it is for everyone else and I'm just sad and bitter. I don't know, can't say. Okay, the size of the groups, depends on the topic and the goals of the research. There's lots of different recommendations. 6 to 10 people. I like that as a general rule. Below 6, it gets hard. People sometimes get a little bit jittery, I guess would be the word, because there's not enough people in the room to kind of drive the energy, and you're really having to drive it as a moderator, which is not super fun. Above 10, it can be really hard to manage and make sure all the voices are heard. That said, if you want 10, I recommend recruiting 12 for your focus group, because almost always 2 people to 3 people to 4 people are not going to show up on the day that you're doing your focus group. That looks like an R. There we go. Much better. I would say always over-recruit, and then you'll have one focus group where you over-recruited. You got 12 people who said they were going to show up and 4 show up, and the other one where you had recruited 12 people and 12 people show up. And then it's a little chaotic. So recruit, but not too much. Smaller groups can have benefits, obviously. If you have controversial or complex emotional kind of topics. And people get more of a chance to talk, right? They can be a little bit more open. You have more time with each participant. That said, again, people who told you that they were going to show up and then don't show up are a problem with small groups, because it's never happened to me, but I can imagine a scenario where you recruited 6 people, 4 people don't show up, and suddenly your focus group is 2, which is going to be a very awkward couple of hours for you as the moderator, I guarantee. So, 6 minutes, that's too long. I can't just quit. I can do 2 minutes, I can't do 6. Okay. This is a chart, just to show you the kind of diversity in terms of, the kinds of size of focus groups and the number of participants, number of focus groups. This one, bisexual people's experience of mental health services. They had 8 groups of between 3 and 9 people. I almost guarantee they were trying to get 10 per focus group, and in no focus group did everyone show up. And at one point, 3 people showed up, which I'm sure was very, very awkward. Average mean size of groups, they didn't say, so they didn't want you to know how big their average group was. In this one, Froelich et al., they just didn't tell you in their research study how many focus groups they had, which is super cool. Size of the groups, probably 12, which is awesome. Like, how many people, this is where you did not write your methodology section in a particularly specific way, because maybe you're hiding that it didn't go that great when you were recruiting people. And, criteria of inclusion, 4 groups out of 32 Quebec communities. Okay, this one's wild. Audience responses to media messages about AIDS, 52 groups. I'm like, okay, that someone had a big budget for that. Not specified, but appears to be 3, 9, 10, or 3, 9, or 10. Average size of 6.75. That 3/4 of a person was very awkward to fit into the room. So then let and all 4 between 5 and 10. Again, I guarantee they probably were shooting for 10, and they had 1 focus group where 5 people showed up, which again happens, so no big deal. 8, each group had 2 sections, and again, 6 to 10. They're probably aiming for 10 at some point. Some people didn't show up. I love not specified. I don't know why. I don't know how you can get away with that. It's like mirror stab. We did not say how many focus groups we had, but the groups were between 10 and 15. And here, 14, this is a really nice one. Responses of women to watching violence, not the topic, but the size of the focus groups and the number. And 5 to 9, so again, they're probably aiming at 10. And they got, looks like a few of their focus groups were on the smaller side, given the mean side. And that's gonna happen, right? And you just gotta roll with it, because stuff happens. I phoned participants on the day of focus groups. I'm like, hey, I'm just wondering if you're coming. And they're like, no, I forgot. Can I still get my money? It's like, no, go away. You're dead to me now. I don't want to talk to you. Oh, can I do a different one? No, this is the last day. Yeah. I didn't wake up in time. Okay, I hear that. You sound hungover. It works out. Okay. Anyway, so that's, there's no right number when it comes to focus groups. There's only sort of averages. And I mean, man, 52. If you can get 52 focus groups, you're in a happy place. Okay, now it's 3 minutes. I'm going to say that's good enough for today. We'll talk about selecting focus group participants on Friday, and we'll go with that. Limitations of focus groups. Okay, there we go. And this time I'm going to shut off the recording so it doesn't go